Okay, this is Robert Harrington Sweat. He was born on August the 5th, 1925. He served in World War II in the U.S. Army. Highest rank achieved was
Sergeant.
Sergeant. This recording is being made in Austin, Texas on July the 6th, 2007. The interviewer is Robert Sweat Jr., his son. And this interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Okay, can you tell us, Mr. Sweat, where and when you were born?
I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, August 5th, 1925.
And your parents' occupations?
My father was a locomotive engineer, and my mother was a housewife.
Okay. Number of your brothers and sisters and gender?
I had one brother and 4 sisters.
Okay. And what were you doing before you entered the service?
Attended high school.
So you went directly from...
Yes, I became eligible for the draft immediately when I finished high school.
Okay. What other members of your family were in the military?
One older brother.
Okay. You tell us how you entered the service?
I entered it from Birmingham, Alabama. I went I was drafted and sent to camp in Alabama for physical test, physical, medical history, and all of that. And they did not, ask you, what you want to be in and all at that time. They sent me back back home after going to indoctrination. It was Camp McClellan, Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Is that where you went through boot camp?
No. The first thing I did, went to Atlanta, Georgia, and given all the tests and so forth for classification.
Mm-hmm.
And I took the test, and the test is ranked if you made a score of 115, you were eligible for the OCS. If you made a score of 135 or higher, you're eligible for applying for the Army Specialized Training Program, ASTP.
What was your score?
152, something like that. It was.
Did you get into any of these programs?
Yes, I was taken into the ASTP program, and was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia.
And what did you do there?
I had basic training, because the program was they had to go through all the basic training, and then you're sent to college after that. And my plans were to go to college and become an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
For the program in Fort Benning, we had the same basic training as the OCS candidates and so forth, because that's the way it was. Fort Benning was a very large camp, and we were just a small part of the group.
What was the specialized training that you qualified for?
Well, this was if you had a high score, which mine was actually the highest I ever had at that time. And supposed to go to college and train for being engineer in service.
But you didn't do that?
Well, right after about the time we finished the basic training at Fort Benning, it was announced that the Army did not need personnel for ASTP. So instead of going to college from there, I went to Camp Livingston, Louisiana for training.
What was your training there?
Well, actually I was assigned to infantry division. I was in the 86th Infantry Division, and was a member of the D Company of 343rd Infantry Division. And we trained, we started out the training in Fort Benning, Georgia was all of our basics, but you got more specialized when you entered, went to a division, so forth. The division I was in was composed of a lot of people that had entered the Army Specialized Training Program. In fact, in one section I had, we had 6 PhDs, which was quite good. They instead of playing type of cards that you normally would, you play chess and various other things.
What specialized training did you get, if any?
Well, I was my specialized training was in the. I was assigned to heavy weapons. Well, this is a squad, which we had the mortars and heavy machine guns, 30 caliber water-cooled machine guns. We trained on firing there and learned to throw hand grenades, so forth, and we did mock-up things. We also had went to down into the swamps and so forth of Louisiana. And one thing that took me out of my regular group at that time and assigned me to be enemy detail. And so I was sent out into the swamps, and each platoon in my infantry division came through. They had night marches. And my job was to harass them and give them all the trouble that I could. So I set up a long cable that went from the top of a hill down to the bottom of the hill, and I was provided with all sorts of rockets and so forth at the top of the hill, and I had a Jeep there that set everything off like take off, because the troops coming through are ready to kill you. Now what we did was the Army had set up a dummy, a stuffed dummy that was well over 200 pounds, and so I attached a sleeve that I could turn it loose, and when the troops were coming through, it started up a long hill there. This is in the night. It went down and knocked them off the side of the road and all, and at the same time I'd set up fireworks, Roman candles, and everything at the top of the hill, and I set all that off to simulate action. And then I would leave before they got to the top of the hill. I would leave. Since then, several times I run across people who, the ones coming up the hill, and they said, if I could get him, I'd kill him. My other job at that time, was to sneak into camp where the troops were, after sleeping during the day after forced march at night. And my job was to try to steal their weapons. And ones I stole, I gave to a colonel who was handling the operation. And he would go back in, call everybody out, and present them the weapons back. So I stayed out in the swamps for it's a number of months. I don't remember how many, but it was a long time. Well, until every squad out of 15,000 people came through.
Where'd you go from there?
After our training there at Camp Livingston, Louisiana, sent us home for a short while, just for a short furlough, and then I was shipped out to California for further training. And then California, the decision was made that we would do amphibious training at San Luis Obispo. And so we learned to use the amphibious vehicles. I was manship, well, it was a small infantry vessel that was used for landing. We trained first with going up and down the nets to get off a ship down to landing craft. Then we made amphibious landings all up and down the coast of California. This went on a number of months. In fact, we went all from one end of California to the other end, making landings.
Where were you based during this time?
We had a camp close to San Luis Obispo.
Were you living at that camp?
I lived in the camp at that time.
So then you would get on a boat and go by boat?
Yeah, we would march down the. Well, all the training involved going into the surf at that time and handling boats and so forth. And then we made a field exercise that we went up and down the coast of California, all the way from San Diego on up to past San Luis Obispo, going up the coast. And that went on quite a while. We made numerous amphibious landings.
So at this time you were living in barracks or tents?
They're tents.
What was life like at that point?
Well, actually it was quite good there. And at Fort Benning we had tar paper shacks, which couldn't keep the cold out very well. But there we were in tents most of the time, although at one point we had some barracks that we stayed in. While we were there, the invasion of Europe had already started, and had the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944, and they decided that well, the Americans were you know, falling back and so forth. But due to weather conditions, there's very little air support for troops over there, and the Germans were really, I mean, coming through at the Battle of the Bulge.
What day did you enter the service?
I don't remember the exact date, but it was in probably October of 1943.
43.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, at the point that you're in California, it is what time frame?
It was right before Christmas. When the Battle of the Bulge started and saw what was happening, they abandoned our project at that time for amphibious training, and we were shipped to Boston, and
By
went.
train?
We arrived in Boston and stayed in Boston 3 or 4 days. And at that time, Boston had a heavy snowfall. So we shipped out from Boston to go to Le Havre, France, in a convoy. And during the trip across, there was German U-boats around. They did depth charges many times on if they were trying to sink our convoy. They could. So you wake out in the middle of the night with it on boom, 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 and the depth charges.
How long did it take you to cross?
I think it was 8 or 9 days, something like that. We got into some very rough weather. In fact, everybody on board got seasick. The ship we were on had been a luxury liner that was converted to a supply ship down with the Graf's Spey and Speed in Brazil area, and it was captured by the Americans and turned into a troop ship. So everything on board the ship was in German.
Did you have any ability to understand it?
Not at that time. No, I took German later.
Okay.
We landed in Le Havre and set up in a tent camp there. It's called Camp Chesterfield. They named them all cigarettes, all the camps.
And this was approximately December or January?
Yeah, that was still in December
44.
44. And they had not, since we came over in such a big hurry, they had not set up for food for us. And the general thinking was that Quartermaster Cord sold food to the French who were really starving. That was the general feeling, although. So all we had initially there was powdered eggs that they made in a big 2.5 by 3 feet or 3.5 foot pans, in which you fill them full of, broke all the eggs in there and stirred them up and baked them. Says that was all we had to eat for a while, so we decided that just wasn't going to do it. And although we were quarantined to camp, several of us sneaked out of the camp and went to a town, a French town, and bought eggs and bread and so forth. While we were in town, we ran across MPs and officers of the guard. Because we were quarantined to camp, we weren't supposed to be there. So I had an MP with the rifle there, and they saw another group coming, so the officers of the guard ran to the other group, left that MP there with us. Well, we decided to make a run for it. So we took off running and got away from them and ran back to camp. We got into camp, the guard had been doubled around for apprehending. So I crawled on my stomach on through between guards and got back in my camp. And beside there, they're going to investigate it further. We took the bread and the eggs and so forth and dug a hole in the middle of the camp, put them all in there, and then covered it up and went to bed. Well, not long after we went to bed, the officer of the guard came through with the MPs and so forth and shined a light in everyone's faces, went around and decided we weren't the ones. But the next morning, we went to chow line in order to eat breakfast, which again was still powdered eggs, and so forth. And although they candled eggs before they powdered them, there were some rotten ones. Always got through it, so they weren't very good. But the officers of the guard was our chow line there. We'd told them what company we were in, so I didn't have my glasses on, and when he saw me before with the glasses on, so he didn't recognize me. In fact, they didn't recognize anyone there. It was about 3 or 4 days later we got the food we're supposed to have, and I was sent to Paris to pick up vehicles. In fact, a lot of us did. Sent to Paris and picked up vehicles and drove them back to camp. We were in Paris about 2 or 3 days. Enough time. We arrived in Paris and we had to wait there for a day for everything get ready so we could drive vehicles back to camp. So we got to go up the Eiffel Tower, and so I went through an awful lot of Paris, walking around and so forth. The Arc de Triomphe, and like that. It was very interesting, and I haven't been to Paris since, but there's many things in Paris that the war, Paris had just been returned back to France since German occupation was over not too long before that. we got back to camp and immediately closed up everything and headed for the Battle of the Bulge. I was driving a Jeep and had a heavy machine gun mounted on it. And we saw our first combat while we're heading toward Belgium. And I was driving the Jeep down the road into town there, and I saw these tracer bullets around, and I said, I wonder who they're shooting at, and I realized I was the only one there, and they were shooting at me. And that's when I learned to drive a Jeep hanging my head out below the level of the windshield out the side, and drove that way till we got out of town. We continued on through, encountering some Germans on the way, and we were going up to Belgium to relieve the, I believe it was 101st Airborne. So we ended up in Belgium, and the airborne troops all left. And so we stayed there for a short time. And then we joined Patton's army at that time. The first thing we did was going into Germany. And we went down to Cologne, and our job there was to keep the Germans from crossing the river there at night. So we would end up setting up all of our artillery, so forth, along the shore, and we had this section at the big beautiful cathedral there in Cologne. So we would come down at night to repel any crossing by the Germans. And then just before daylight, we'd pull back out. At that time, we were quartered in apartments that had been by the Germans. And the apartment that I was in with a few others had been owned by some German girls, and they came back there, and some of the men had been working on vehicles and so forth, and wiped their hands on the draperies in the apartment with grease on them. And oh, those German girls were mad. There's good reason for them to be mad. There just wasn't any sense in that. But we have a lot of soldiers. In fact, there's nothing. I mean, anything's fair with the German against the Germans. We.
When did you learn to speak German?
In college? Oh, well, I learned a lot of German words there. The Army gave you a brief course in German, and you had written out things that you really need to know in order to have a minimum contact with the Germans. But there's a large number of Germans called the Ruhr Pocket. And so our divisions surrounded the area, and the Germans in this group thought we were a much bigger unit than we were. We had generals surrender, and the generals had these big staff cars. You've seen them really long and big, and heavy and so forth. And when they got out of them, turned them over to us, the boys said they could. It took these big staff cars and head them toward each other and get the engine running, and they jumped out and they smashed up dozens. The Ruhr pocket, I was out patrolling the area. We had guards all around the area. We captured, that's, I don't know, 50,000, 75,000 Germans, and there were 15,000 of us, all told. But they surrendered, and we turned them over after a few days to MPs. They haul them off prisoners. While we were there, and the first time I ran across a dead German, I didn't know it, but patrolling around looking for Germans in high weeds and so forth, and I stepped into something, and it was a German soldier that had died. I'd stepped, and he had deteriorated to such extent my shoe went right through him down right through to his backbone. Well, that was the smellingest shoes I've ever had. And at that time, I couldn't get replacements. I only had one pair of shoes. I couldn't get replacements. I tried everything in the world to get that smell off my shoes, because I had to wear the shoes. I finally got it where it was tolerable. That's about it. When we ended up with the Ruhr pocket, we went with the patent on the lightning strike down through South Germany, so forth. And we went to such places as Ingolstadt, and had there's a river there called the Isar Canal. There was a transportation canal there. We stayed in Ingolstadt for a good while. And in fact, we ended up going through search for all German soldiers and captured a number of them. And one of them was a German colonel. And I took a German flag from his place, and I took a shotgun, the prettiest shotgun I've ever seen. There's no external screws or anything. And the arm said I had to turn it loose. I couldn't keep it. Well, I said, the heck with that. I threw it over a bridge into the canal. I knew what happens when such things were caught on you and then confiscated. At a later date, I found out that what I had taken around the neck of officers, or carried by officers in the group, and they didn't go back to anything. They took them with them to go home. So I decided that shotgun was not going to be one of them. We traveled down past Ingolstadt and several other cities there, and we went through Munich at one point, and I'm not sure exactly where that was. And we crossed the Danube River on set up platoon things. The Corps of Engineers sets up so we could drive across. And we drove across, and right after we had crossed over, somebody had a radio that's tuned to the news for the troops and announced that Patton's army had crossed the Danube, and we were the ones crossing that time. So it wasn't 5 minutes after we crossed that it was. All the time along with Patton's army there, was fighting all along the way. And at one point, I had to take a general back to back lines somewhere, and I drove him back there and turned back to my unit. But I heard a lot of noise of some vehicles having a problem in the swampy area there. And I got out of the Jeep and went over to see if I could help. Well, it was a German half-track, and these were all Germans. So I decided to just let them be. And I went back with my unit. At one point, we pulled back for a day off, and I had seen some deer, and I decided to go hunting for some deer in the woods in South Germany. And I saw a herd of them, and they were between me and the town that we were in. And so I decided I was going to kill a deer. These are small deer, a mouse deer, they call them. And I made the first shot, and they headed straight toward me. And I killed 14. And took them all in a Jeep back to camp. Well, the German civilians around said we will clean them and dress them if you let us have the skins and the bones and so forth. And so I had enough deer there to feed everybody in our regiment. I've never hunted deer since. I got sick of it after killing that many. I didn't realize I'd killed that many. But it was 14 of them that I gathered up and took back to camp. We continued, after day off, we continued on toward South Germany, and had battles with the Germans all along the way, of course, but it got to be less and less. And all along roads, there are just masses of people that have been imprisoned and so forth. And they'd always say, when we came by there, Nick starts Ruski was the general theme. The Russian prisoners that had been released, whatnot, or German or Russian civilians had been taken to South Germany. So we went on, we continued along with this, and we had brought up some ration trucks to feed German civilians that were just had no food or anything. And we did all that until we ended up in a farm down in 15 miles from Berchtesgaden. Prior to that, we went through one concentration camp. I can't remember which one it was right now, but we were the first ones there, and the German soldiers had gone, but the people that had not been killed were there, and previous to this, we had found a bunch of Italians that had been imprisoned by the Germans when Italy had earlier, dropped being the ally of Germany, and so we turned loose the Italians to make their way back. And the first night they sang Italian songs all night long. We went to a concentration camp, and I saw such things as light shade made out of human skin, stuff like that. Then a lot of dead people that most of the bodies and so forth burned, but they didn't get to all of that.
Was this a Jewish concentration camp or other?
I think it's mostly Jewish there, but they had other people in there too.
Did it look anything like the pictures we see today?
It looked exactly like the pictures you see today. In fact, some of the pictures I saw at the Holocaust Museum in Washington looked like exact scenes we'd seen. We went from there and went down to the border of Austria, and we were to wait there until the Russians came from the other side, and we'd meet them. Well, meanwhile, waiting, we had found a trunk full of German money. Thought that it really didn't mean anything, but found out that if you went over to Austria, I could buy anything with it. So I took a lot of the German money and went over and loaded a truck with kegs of beer. I didn't drink beer, but everybody else did. I went to Salzburg. That was the closest town, Austria, and I bought the beer in Salzburg and took it back to our troops. Somewhere in there, the war in Europe was over, and the army passed out to everyone one bottle of whiskey and one bottle, or what I got was schnapps, and then some wine. And I gave it to my friends who I didn't ever drink any of that. But as soon as the war was over in Europe, we were sent back up to Mannheim and Heidelberg, and we were there just a few days and decided to ship us back to the States. So we headed straight back to Le Havre and put on board a ship to come back to the States. And so we got back to the States. We ended up, I think we landed in Boston and immediately went on trains to head back to, we were given orders to, and tickets to get back to our cities where we're going to. So I was going to Birmingham, so I was able to take a train back to Birmingham. And we stayed, I think it was the 30-day furlough there, and We were then told to report in Los Angeles, get back the troops again. So I took a train from Birmingham to New Orleans, and from New Orleans to Los Angeles. The only problem was civilians and all there. And the entire time I sat on barracks bag, whatnot. There was no place to lie down, anything. So on 4 days, no place to lie down, anything. It's sat on something like that and lean against the wall, because everything was really crowded. We went. I'm sorry. This time we went to Camp Stoneman at Muskogee, Oklahoma. What I did, not to L.A. And there we started training for the invasion of Japan. Well, we were given a lot of details exactly where we were going to be in the invasion. It ended up that we were going to be the front line group to land first. We'd had already a tremendous amount of amphibious training. So we were there training Camp Stoneman, and when the first atomic bomb was dropped. And as soon as it was dropped, everything changed, because they realized the war may be over shortly and wouldn't need to invade Japan. So when the first atomic bomb was dropped, anybody that was on a 3-day pass and so forth wasn't cared. Were discharged and they came back to camp. But anybody that was there, not if you're in the medical facility and so forth, you didn't go. But everybody else put on a train right then and there and went hot shot to Richmond, California, as fast as we could go. We got to Richmond. They immediately put us on board a ship to head. We didn't know where at that time, but in fact, I think it was out at sea before we were out of San Francisco area in a couple of 3 days when the second atomic bomb had dropped. And then peace was declared. They changed where we were going to go to the Philippine Islands. And the objective there was to go through and get all the Japanese out of the islands, and do it by telling them if they surrendered to us, they would be put on board a ship the next 2 days, go back to Japan. We set up camp in the Philippines 20 some odd miles north of Manila, and had the job. We had some Japanese prisoners that time. I would take 2 Japanese prisoners and a 2.5-ton truck, which would handle 25 men back in the back. I would take 2 Japanese prisoners and head out in the jungle and so forth, and they would, and the 2 Japanese prisoners would go and try to make contact with the Japanese there, and this worked out quite well. Had no problem most of the time, and we'd take every time we'd take 25 prisoners on back to camp. They would be processed and then generally put on ship the next day or two, headed back to Japan. Occasionally you'd run across some of them that didn't know that, weren't convinced that the war was over, but generally they were convinced, and they turned in their rifles and everything that time. And this went on for months there. In fact, we really never finished the job. We got an awful lot of them back out, but we went through jungles and so forth, back looking for the Japanese. And as long as you had Japanese prisoners that could go out and make themselves known and talk to them, you generally get them to surrender. We had a little off time there in which there's a place up in the mountains that they considered making the Senate of the United Nations. That I believe the name of Baguio. And I drove up there. They were on a road that snaked around the straight drop off on one side, and it's fairly close. You had to stop with 2 vehicles, maybe each other. You had to get to the widest point so one could pass opposite direction coming back down. And they had going up the Bachman got on the road, said traffic toll, said none killed, none injured. I think it was 35 missing. Because to drop down the jungle, you wouldn't ever see anything again. But we went to Baguio, and first time I'd ever seen any pygmies. But they were pygmies in Baguio. They had farmers markets and so forth in full swing there. And this, I enjoyed going to Baguio. That was very nice. Came back down to our camp, and our camp was in the midst of banana trees, coconut palms. I learned how to take the husk off a coconut and end up being able to eat it. Or a lot of people cut the hole in there and leave it and let it ferment when air could get to it. Ferment and then drink the fermented coconut juice. This went on until I was determined to, ship back to the States in March 1946. While we were there in camp, we had various and sundry things. They had a division bowling group, which we represented our division in that area. So I was sent to division headquarters and practice for being on a bowling team representing our division there. And the little difference in the type of food at division headquarters, we had steaks all the time and everything else you really wanted. And all this was on the menu in there, and back in my regular area, but it was always marked through and something else, because you never had any steak. You had an awful lot of supposed to be lamb, but it wasn't lamb, it was mutton, and it's almost inedible. I mean, you had to hold your nose while you ate it. The mutton doesn't smell too good. The last day that I was out seeking Japanese troops, we had a problem with a group of them that we couldn't convince them or get close enough to them to let them know the war was over. And so we were in ditches around to keep from getting hit by Japanese snipers and so forth, until it got dark and we headed back to camp. Somewhere along in this, we went to a Japanese, where they set up a camp, and I was walking through looking for Japanese, and something wham landed on my head. I don't know what in the world it was. It was a monkey. It had been a pet, I guess, Japanese troops. And I kept the monkey until I left and gave it away when we left coming back to the States. We got on board the ship at Manila, head back to the States, and as soon as we got away from Manila, found out they had a earthquake close to Alaska, and they looked for a tremendous tidal wave to come through, and our ship wasn't built for taking such. So we ended up going south across the equator to get away from it until the wave came on through. As it came through, it was a fairly minor thing. What is? I'm Robert H. Sweat. My Army serial number is 34819-099.
Rank?
I rank as a sergeant.
Dates of service?
Dates of service, October something, 43 until April of 1946.
This is tape number 2. Okay. Why don't you tell us about some of the conditions in the various camps and on the battlefield when you were at the front, what the conditions you were working under, the friends you developed, and tell us about action that you saw.
Well, my first action I mentioned before was when the Germans were shooting at me and not at somebody else. And, then it's a matter of on a Friday the 13th, so with Patton's army coming after the Ruhr pocket, we were coming down a mountain, and a narrow road there, and we were shelled by German artillery there, and my section was We had, I believe it was 22 people in my machine gun section. And 20 of them were hit, some killed. And I was one of 2 that didn't get a scratch. And could have well killed all of us. And that was the most we had, injured or something at one time was right there.
All from artillery. You never saw the...
Never saw, and in fact, we'd call back in, we'd been shelled, but had no idea where it came from. We had some spotter planes. The Army sent some spotter planes up to try to locate the German artillery, but we didn't get any feedback on what happened there. I'd like to mention one thing, that although we had Army PXs and so to have, but out in combat you couldn't ever get anything. Although my hair was starting to thin, I couldn't get anything to wash my hair with. The only thing was GI soap, which is a very harsh soap. You wash your face and all of that. We could not. You couldn't get things that should be at PXs and so forth. We never saw any PX. And could never. Trying to find toothpaste to get something like that was almost impossible. So, some troop units did have access to PXs, but we didn't.
When you were with Patton's Army on this march to the Ruhr Valley, where did you stay? What sort of camp? In our Jeeps, chiefly. I went several days there, and rained on us, and all that, and snowed on us, and all, and never got out vehicles except for contact with German troops. There's one thing that mentioned that a lot of the fighting, I would have a Jeep with a water cooled machine gun on it and so forth, and 81 millimeter mortars, stuff like that. And when the troops were pinned down up ahead, they'd radio back to me to bring up the heavy weapons, and I'd drive a Jeep up there, and where everybody else is in ditches right there, and they had to unload the weapons, and I'd take off back behind further. Yeah, but this happened, many times, and that was the water-cooled machine guns, quite heavy, so need to transport it by vehicle, and the large mortars were quite heavy. Ammunition for those quite heavy, so. I also had a job of handling a bazooka, whenever you need to use a bazooka. Well, I was called on to bring the bazooka up front and man bazooka when there was tank attacks. And I've gone up and set up a point where I could shoot a bazooka, and the object was to shoot at the treads, knock the treads off. And I did that. Actually, I hit one
once knocked the treads off, and he swung his, he couldn't move, but he could rotate his turret so that he could shoot anywhere. And that was time to get up and go. But after you fired it, so I did stop that, and our troops ended up killing everyone in it. So, to mention that.
Where was that? Where did the tank incident take place?
Somewhere, it's heading from northern Germany down to South Germany. It's somewhere in, I don't remember which one, but some of the towns, there's a lot of fighting. We were in the same area for a good while, going through house to house and stuff like that. But then tank incident, it was out in the open. There was a German line there that they were coming through to disrupt our progress. From that tank incident, I shot against some other tanks, and I'm not sure where, did any real damage to them. But I did use a bazooka a number of times.
What keeps you from getting burned by the blast of the rocket, the bazooka?
I didn't have any problem with that. If you did it right, it's the blast is behind you, so, and you have it on your shoulder to shoot. So if you do it right, you don't get any chance of that. We did have a number of occasions in which we would be coming down a mountain or something and run across a German convoy trying to retreat down below. We'd set up the machine guns and the mortars, and we were able to drop 81 millimeter mortar shell out on top of the lead vehicle in the convoy there and stop the convoy. Then we used a machine gun to break the whole thing. I remember one incident which there was a German soldier on a motorcycle. He was supposed to take information back to the rear to where we were, and we set up and shot at him and knocked him off his vehicle and his motorcycle. He ended up getting back on and keep trying to go, and finally he never got up the last time. There's a few instances like that.
What about friendships or
Well, everyone that you work with were close friends, so forth, and I had some good friends that I've had no contact with most of those since then. A lot of our troops were from Chicago and New York, so forth. And I didn't realize it, but I grew up in the South and had no problem with Jewish people. In fact, we did fine. And I found out that they were hated by a lot of the people from Chicago and New York, that city slicker type. And I was positioned to defend them on many occasions, that stop them from scrubbing them with a GI brush and so forth, which is a terrible thing to do. I may want to mention, we found out the Germans had a thing that you could use your canteen cup. They had a little box that fill it with a little cubes that you could take those out of there. You took one cube and ignite it with, you set your canteen cup on top. The thing folded up, the sides would come up and end up as a little stove there. And while you were in ditches somewhere or so forth and had time for a cup of coffee, you could make your cup of coffee that had everything in that little container. This I liberated from German troops. And that was a major invention. Our Army didn't have anything like that. The Germans did. And it was great. That was good coffee.
How did you have any contact with home during the?
Yes, I wrote home. I wrote to everybody many letters, and I found out later that most of them had a heading on there and my signature, and most of the rest was cut out, because they're all censored, all outgoing mail. And I saw anybody get killed or others getting killed, that was all cut out. Never mentioned or received in the States by anyone. Although I wrote the letters and sent them. But mail to us was sometimes very difficult to get, and I found out many times that cookies and so forth had been sent to me, but I never got them.
Was there any recreation or anything that happened during off-duty during this time that you want to talk about?
We had.
You mentioned to me in the past a story about getting into a French winery, or wine cellar.
Oh, this was in Cologne, in which there's a wine cellar in Cologne. There was kegs and kegs of wine, and some of the troops decided that they needed to destroy that, and they broke up into the cellars and dumped wine, and had 6 to 8 inches of wine on the floor of a big cellar. I didn't drink wine, but there were a lot that did, so instead of keeping it like it's supposed to be, they just tore up the wine cellars. But this is in Cologne, and it was close to where the big cathedral was. I don't remember exactly what our last subject was.
Let's talk about your crossing back at the end of the war when you're returning home and being discharged. What it was like re-entering civilian life, the reception you received at home.
When I got back to the States, and I went by train from California to Birmingham, and everyone knew when I was coming in, and they set up a big fishing trip. I got in one night, and they set up a big fishing trip, leave out about 4 o'clock in the morning to go fishing. Needless to say, I didn't have a fishing license, active fishing license at that time, and I went out fishing, and altogether. And a game warden stopped us and checked for fishing license, and I had no fishing license. So I just came back that night from overseas, and gave me a ticket, and I had to report to court, report to a judge with that ticket. And I explained to him that I just come back from overseas and hadn't had time to get a fishing license or anything else, because it was this night before there was nothing open. He said, I'll make it very lenient on you. Fine will be $1 and court cost. Well, the fine was $1, but the court cost was $20.70. And that was about all I had.
Who organized this fishing trip?
I think it was Bug and Glover.
So your brother and
Yeah,
your
brother-in-law. Yeah. And several others went along with the fishing trip with us.
What did you do from there? You're back in the States.
I was going to college in the fall.
So you
And
had
I
already
decided-
applied, or
No, I applied during this time for going to college and on the GI Bill to the University of Alabama. And I went to work. I had worked right after I finished high school for a short time there. Well, I had worked for WWII Company as a night parks clerk while I was in high school. The earlier point, I worked for A&P and so forth, but got this job as night parks clerk, which I could do my lessons at night while working. And it paid fairly good money, and I went back to work for WWII as a night parks clerk.
did you have any problem readjusting to civilian life?
No, it was nice being out of the Army. I was in the reserves then for a good while.
Were you, when the Korean conflict started, were you close to being called back?
Well, in the Korean conflict, I was working for Eastman in Kingsport, Tennessee. And all my other friends had been servicemen working there. They were had joined the reserves there and trained one weekend out of the month, things like that. And I had all the Army that I really wanted to have, and so I declined to join the reserves. The Korean conflict broke out, and all of them were taken to active duty and went over into Korea. And I was one of the lucky ones that I stayed there. But there's lots of engineers that went in this Korean conflict.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to say in summary of your experience of the war?
Well, I think they have a much better system now as doing, providing just essential things of life, toothpaste, hair oil conditioning, or something like that, in which we did not have any contact, any method of paying anything. I would write home for it, and they'd send it to me, but it never got to me. And of course, I didn't like the that the treatment of the enlisted personnel was quite different from that of officers. I had some officers that were as dumb as could be, and I was considerably smarter than they were. But and they didn't mind. Right after the war was over, still no fraternization with the Germans. Well, apparently it wasn't applying to officers. At least they were never arrested for it or anything like that. So I ended up having to drive some officers out to the bunch of German girls, and they had no, they paid no attention to whatever rules there were.
Anything else?
No, I have seen very few of the people that I was in service with since then. In fact, very few. I've run across some on a trip to New York once. I've seen some in Macy's, but that's about it.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. While in training at Camp Livingston, we had some maneuvers down in the swamps, and we went on down about 25 miles from Camp Livingston, south of Camp Livingston, and several of us got sick. And we had running high temperatures and really needed to be checked out medical personnel that we didn't have. And I think they thought we were loafing or whatnot, but the three of us that were real sick, we had high temperatures, said, you need to go back to the base, and you're going to walk back 25 miles. So we walked back to the base, and we entered in the hospital. It was strep throat, and one died. One of the three died there, and I was in the hospital for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that with strep throat. But somebody's decision to do that, because they didn't think you were really sick, although I had high temperature. There's one other incident of mine. Early in the days, Camp Livingston went on a convoy down somewhere, and the driver with in front of me, and with the truck, I had a Jeep, ran off the road, went to sleep, ran off the road, and turned over on top of the troops that were in there with him, and 4 were killed, and several had broken arms, broken legs, so forth. And this was they ended up having to send a crane from Camp Livingston down there to pick up the truck off of them, because they couldn't do anything, move anything, and whatnot, because it's the road had a steep drop off when it went to sleep, went up. And this driver was allowed to drive again within a month after that, after killing 4 men. go in here.